Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow Season 9. I'm Mihir Bhatt. You are watching the latest edition of Leaders of Tomorrow. Our theme is Empowering Billion Dreams. And we have a very special guest with us today who's behind a lot of visionary reforms and steps that government has unleashed. We have with us Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor, Government of India. Sanjeev, thank you so much for joining us. And it's a pleasure having you in the launch week of Leaders of Tomorrow, Season 9. First of all, how would you like to greet our viewers? Because our viewers are essentially at the cornerstone of India's story, the small and medium enterprises.
So let me begin by saying that it is indeed a pleasure to be on your show. And greetings to all of you who are watching this show. And yes, this has been a difficult year, but I think with all the hard work that's going in from both the side of the government and from the corporate sector and the MSME sector, I think we are digging ourselves out of this and we will be a stronger country for all.
Right. So in fact, that leads me into my first question as well. Sanjeev, this year has been absolutely exceptional. You know, in Feb or March, early March, nobody would have imagined that the country will go through such a grind. And it has been across the economy. So right from smallest of the enterprises and mom and pop shops to the largest of the corporates. Government did intervene, took various steps. So if you can just summarize all of that, and what is the the main thought or the logic behind that? Because somewhere it seems that government wants to convert this crisis into an opportunity.
Absolutely, and we have taken a particular strategy, which is somewhat different from what maybe other countries have done, because we saw our circumstances were different. And to understand what we did is the following. In March, we really had very little information about the disease, how long it will last, and so on. But we did realize that this is not going to be a sprint, it's going to be a marathon. We also took the view that we had to, first of all, not try and reinflate demand as quickly as possible, which is many other countries took, very large mega projects as early as April and May. We took the view that, look, there is no point in pressing the accelerator when you've got your foot firmly on the brake. So we did not attempt to reinflate demand. Many advisors and foreign experts told us to begin to reinflate. But what we said is, look, we are ourselves shutting down things for health reasons. And we are aware that there is a price to be paid for it on the economic front. Not that we were unaware of it. But there is no point in trying to reinflate demand just when we are ourselves shutting it down. So what we focused on in April, May, June was to provide a safety net. So we created the world's largest food safety net. 800 million people were provided food at free or nearly free, provide gas, provide some cash transfers. Now, none of this was expected to reinflate demand. What we are doing is providing a cushion. Same thing was done for the business sector. We pushed back various financial deadlines. We provided a moratorium on various loans and other things. And then, of course, we provided 100% guarantee, particularly for the MSME sector, and various other ways of providing liquidity. Now, nobody is claiming that we were trying to revive demand then. We were just trying to provide a cushion. Now, come August, we were able to begin to open things up very substantially, and we did it very systematically. As we were able, by the time we had some testing ability on the ground, we had quarantining facilities, a lot more information was available about the nature of the pandemic. So by August, we were opening things up, and you would have seen that as we opened things up, demand did come back tentatively initially in August, but certainly in September and October substantially. And so that is how we have been progressing step by step. Now, as things have opened up, we have now begun to do what we had been advised to do in the beginning, which was to begin to ramp up demand. So you will begin to see much more steps. Of course, the RBI had very upfront cut some interest rates, but they, starting September, October, began to move more into providing it through liquidity. And from the government side, you've seen step-by-step announcements, for example, a scheme for employing people into the formal sector, and the government was going to provide all the EPF payments for hiring people into this sector. Similarly, PLI scheme aimed to getting investment going again in the private sector. And then there was a scheme earlier to get government employees to go and spend more. So, step by step, ramping things up. But it is only meaningful to do it right now as we have got things open and we have avenues for that spending to happen.
Absolutely. Now we can talk about the supply side measures, because like you rightly mentioned, while there has been this overhang of pandemic, so many things have happened which otherwise would have taken years for any government to put into play, all the reforms put together. So what is your take on that, and how this is going to affect our course of economy in, let's say, next 3 to 4 years?
So when we're thinking about this, an important part of our thinking is the following, is that, the post-COVID world is not going to be a re-inflation of the pre-COVID world. This is something you need to understand. This new world will have its own technologies, its own consumer behavior, its own geopolitics, its own supply chains, and so on. So it is rather fruitless to try and re-inflate the pre-COVID world into the post-COVID world. So this is something that drives a lot of our thinking. And if that is the case, the problem is, how do you predict where it will go? You can't, because many of these things will interact with each other and go down certain paths. So while we will use schemes like PLI, etc., to build up, clusters and certain favored segments, the overarching story is that, look, we can't exactly cannot exactly tell where this whole thing is going. So what do? So there are two sort of guiding principles in the way we think about this. First of all, most important, flexibility and adaptability. We need our factors of production, our businesses, to be able to deal with whatever are the new opportunities that emerge out of this. So since flexibility is one of the overriding principles, you look at the reforms we have done, they're all tuned towards flexibility. So when we have gone for labor reforms, we have actually on one hand strengthened certain aspects of it. For example, on safety, on working conditions. But on flexibility, we have dramatically improved it. Why? Because new sectors will emerge. We need to be able to reallocate our workforce to those new sectors. So that's why the premium on flexibility. Same thing we have done with agriculture. Why this flexibility? Why this premium here? Well, we now live in a country where population growth rate has dramatically slowed. It's now below 1% and falling. If you're going to ask your agriculture sector to keep producing more and more production, and that too based on growing more and more calories in a particular specific grain dependent kind of way, then you will produce agricultural production which ultimately cannot be consumed inside the country. And there are limits to how much you can export to the rest of the world as well. So you need to open the system up so that we can adapt to the new kinds of tastes that arise, be able to adapt to export markets, be able to create cold chain supply networks. So all of this requires that the agriculture sector is given the kinds of flexibility other parts of the economy have enjoyed since 1991. And so that is the context in which these reforms were done in agriculture. Exactly the same thing in the case of the reforms we've done for the telecom regulations on the IT BPO sector. The idea is that as we emerge into this new post-COVID world, we're able to respond to these new opportunities, and outdated bureaucratic procedures and other things do not get in the way of allowing us to adjust to this new world.
Absolutely. I think that's quite logical. Now, one major initiative and which has found a lot of takers, at the same time critics as well, is Atmanirbhar Bharat. And obviously we understand when Prime Minister announced, at that time it was a different macro and political situation we were in. But the sheer thought process behind it was very interesting, that we need to create self-sufficiency and depend less on ever shaky supply chains globally. So if you can elaborate on that, what is your vision? How are we moving on that?
So just like flexibility is an important aspect of our strategy, the other important aspect is resilience. If you're going into an environment of uncertainty, you need flexibility and you need resilience. So what do you mean by Atmanirbhar Bharat? So let me clarify right up front. It is not a return to 1950s Nehruvian import substitution. This is not a withdrawal from the world. We want to engage with the world. Prime Minister has repeatedly pointed out that we want to be a part of the global supply chains, not just in goods, but also in services. So this is not about sort of an inward withdrawal. What we are, however, doing is investing into creating capacities where we, at least for the key ingredients into various parts of the economy, including our exports, we are able to control our destiny and leverage local capacity. So let me give you an example so that I can illustrate my point. We all know that the generics, the pharmaceutical generics industry is an area where India is at the cutting edge. We are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, generics supplier to the world. However, during this last 6 months, during this COVID episode, we discovered that this highly competitive generics drug industry was dependent on certain single source sort of inputs, which obviously got disrupted as soon as the global supply chains began to break down. And this is, you can imagine, is a serious issue, because you can have most advanced generics and drugs industry, but if key ingredients are not available, then suddenly comes to a grinding halt. So the view from an Atmanirbhar perspective is to be able to identify and protect certain key ingredients into our generics and pharmaceuticals industry. Now, this is, note here, this is not a case of going back to import substitution of the old kind. We don't want to go back to driving ambassador cars. This is about protecting the resilience of a highly competitive international industry. And so you have to understand the thinking behind this, and consequently, it will also immediately lead you to the kinds of sort of schemes and projects and other things that we will put in place for Atmanirbhar Bharat.
What would be your advice to a small or a medium business unit who is operating in India right now?
Capital has been made cheap. The government has tried it. We really have tried our very best to provide you with support wherever we can. If there are things, major reforms that are needed, we are in the mood to do more.
Now I will talk about the PLI scheme, because it's directly going to impact 10 sectors which are key to manufacturing. It can actually change the destiny of manufacturing sector in terms of its contribution to GDP and exports and everything. At the same time, it's also going to impact dependents, the smaller businesses which depend on these sectors to perform. So how do you see this panning out?
So for a long time, a criticism has been of the Indian growth model that we sort of move directly from agriculture to services. Now, some part of it is related to the fact of the moment in history that we liberalized our economy in the 90s, and it happened to be software and these kinds of industries were new, so we took advantage of that. It also was the case that there were fewer regulations in the services sector. So consequently, it's an area where we could grow fast. However, one of the things that we should have learned from this whole experience is that genetic diversity matters. You need, particularly an economy of our size, needs to be able to do a variety of things. I'm not saying we can do everything, but at least we should have some amount of breadth of activity that we can do. So one of the things we have learned that when you're talking about resilience, one part of it is genetic diversity of the economy. So now the question is, how do we create segments that are globally competitive and have globally competitive clusters? Because if if we don't want to have generic protectionism and try and go back to the old style inefficiency, then how do you go about it? So one way of doing it is to encourage the private sector, encourage MNCs to create capacities onshore, and also then create various kinds of linkages, which of course with the SMEs and others, so that they are both able to supply a fairly large internal market, but also an external market. And of course, we have to coordinate with the states, because a lot of the issues tend to be at the state level.
Right. We have seen a lot of, the high frequency data, which is which at least it appears very encouraging if it sustains. What is your take? Because if it's sustainable, then I think it'll be a first sign of sustained revival for the smaller businesses who are very keenly watching this space, but maybe don't necessarily understand all the data that comes.
Well, of course, as you can imagine, we did go through a phase where we were in a lockdown, so economic activity, not surprisingly, came sharply down. But as we have opened things up, whether it's because of pent-up demand from the previous period, or because you simply have opened things up so people can do things, we have seen green shoots come back quite quickly in both September and October. I think in November also it has mostly sustained. So I think that phase of opening up has happened. There are still sectors where we need to open up. In travel and hospitality, etc., there are still serious issues related to what we need to open up, and we will continue to open those up. But then we do recognize that there is a need to provide an extra fillip in certain areas, and we will be very watching that very carefully. And the government and the Reserve Bank remain vigilant and are prepared to provide both monetary and fiscal support where necessary.
Absolutely. One question, because you mentioned about tourism industry, there are a lot of businesses, especially the small and medium businesses, who are still, because we are not exactly, I won't say it's a second wave, but we are seeing surge in some geographies within India, where currently cases are spiking, and the night curfews have been introduced in some states and all of that. I want to hear from you. At any point now, can the entire country go into maybe a very short but a very strict kind of stringent kind of lockdown, or is that option completely off the table?
I would say very unlikely, because unlike in March, April, when we didn't know about the nature of the disease and the pandemic, we have a lot more information now. We have already created protocols for localized shutdowns. We have a fair idea about how to deal with it. We have testing capacities, quarantining capacities, and so on. So unlike in the beginning, we have the capacity now to be able to deal with it in a much more targeted fashion. So there are many things that we can do now to kind of to manage it at a much more targeted way than we couldn't have done then. So I think it is very unlikely that we will have to put in a nationwide lockdown like we did earlier, even for a short while. I think we are more than prepared to do a much more localized ones. And you had a recent spike in Delhi, and it did require some extra, effort to control it. But you have seen we have now probably passed the peak of that, and it didn't require very draconian measures at all. So.
Right. Now, coming back to economy, the two questions clubbed into one. I was speaking to NASSCOM and a lot of IT industry stalwarts the other day, and they are very clear that during the pandemic, while rest of the economy or the contributing factors of economy slowed down or went down, the IT and software industry's contribution to GDP actually went into double digits, and it has stayed there. Now there is a very strong hope, especially post the latest reforms that government has unleashed for the entire sector, that it could sustain somewhere in the range of 10-12% of the GDP. If that is to happen with all the reforms that has happened, then can we say that probably that $5 trillion mark that we have been talking about, but it looks it looks hazy at this point by 2024 at least. that can also get, it starts looking better at some point. Is that the right way of looking at
So
it?
I think the point you're making, that the IT sector and the IT enabled sector has in some ways been not just resilient, it's actually grown, is right. And why not? I mean, if there's one sector that should have been able to sustain it, is surely this one. I mean, you and I are doing this interview remotely, and frankly, every grandmother across the country is now able to deal with Zoom. So the fact is that there has been a fundamental change in the ease of use of these technologies. The technologies, by the way, even in the short period, have improved dramatically, and our familiarity with them has also gone up. Which means that there are many things, many activities that we used to traditionally think that had to be done face to face, now are routinely done online. Now, imagine how this opens things up dramatically. We think, for example, of back office outsourcing. Now, why can't we source the front office as well? In fact, anything pretty much can be outsourced. You can do, you don't only have to do back office legal work, you can even do front office legal work. Many of our courts are right now managing to listen to cases online. Now, if you can listen to case between Gurgaon and Delhi, why not Gurgaon and New York? Medical activities and support can be done like this. And, you can set up companies based on this. You can have board meetings like this. All kinds of things can now be done without people moving around. And so this opens up completely new vistas, from teaching to medical services to design, and all kinds of collaboration that was historically thought of being requiring face-to-face interaction.
Absolutely. Now, keeping all the discussion in mind that we did, and all the I would say global macroeconomic headwinds that we are in, at the same time some tailwinds as well. What would be your advice to a small or a medium business unit who is operating in India right now? Because there are two ways of looking at it. The borrowing costs have never been so better in last couple of years. The support in terms of reforms has never been any better than what it is right now. At the same time, there is a little bit of uncertainty how a small business should navigate this scenario and plan his business or his strategy.
I'll be very careful to make generic sweeping statements for the industry. All I will say is that yes, capital has been made cheap. The government has tried it. We really have tried our very best to provide you with support wherever we can. If there are major reforms that are needed, we are in the mood to do more. So please raise what are sort of major structural changes that can be done. It could be regulations that are unnecessary. We will find, like in the case of the telecom regulations on IT BPO sector, we will find ways of removing them. It could be that you're not getting credit because of some technicality. We will look at it. And of course, please reach out to the state governments. There are state governments that are very, very proactive and are looking at making business easier. So many of the state governments will respond very positively to suggestions. So, we remain committed to making it as easy as possible to do business, grow your business, and basically take on the opportunities of the post-COVID world.
Absolutely. That's what our theme is, empowering billion dreams. Sanjeev, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And we hope to connect with you again in the future when things look better. And hopefully that will be in person and not remotely like it is right now.
Yes, look forward to seeing you in person.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.